Welcome. I am so thrilled you're joining me today because, well, we are going to explore something incredibly fascinating. We're diving deep into a rather peculiar yet absolutely marvelous phenomenon in this explainer, the ineffable nature of a spiritual awakening. It's that breathtaking, mind-bending moment when you begin to actually wake up to reality, only to discover that the very tools we use to communicate with each other, our words, our language, suddenly just fall completely short. We've got a lot of ground to cover today regarding the mechanics of human consciousness and the absolute limits of language, so let's just jump right in. So, tell me if this sounds familiar. Have you ever tried to explain a deeply profound experience only to be met with complete, absolute blank stares? It's a uniquely frustrating feeling, isn't it? You have this deeply existential, life-altering moment, and you try so hard to package it up into ordinary words, but it just doesn't translate. The person across from you is looking at you, they're really trying to understand, but the sheer magnitude of what you felt just sort of evaporates in the air between you two. This is the exact core problem we are unpacking today. We're going to look at why our most monumental realizations are so often the absolute hardest to share. That brings us to part one, when the veil slips. Waking up to reality. Let's clearly define what it actually means to wake up here. And to be clear, we are most certainly not talking about simply opening your eyes in the morning or finally getting that first sip of coffee. No, we're talking about the moment when you really begin to see through the whole game of life. It's when that heavy, habitual veil of ordinary consciousness just starts to slip, even if it's just for a split second. You catch this sudden, marvelous glimpse of what is actually going on around us. It's a taste of ultimate freedom. It's a massive shift in perspective that literally changes everything you thought you knew about reality. Suddenly, the most mundane world feels incredibly vibrant and undeniably connected. Section 2. The urge to share, telling the world. Okay, so here's the crucial point. What happens the very moment you wake up and have this glimpse? The immediate reaction is this tremendous, almost overwhelming urge to tell literally everyone you know about it. You want to grab people by the shoulders, shake them just a little bit, and yell, "Look, look, I've seen it. It's all right here." You suddenly realize that we, as an entire society, have been looking in the entirely wrong direction this whole time. And what's really interesting here is that this burning desire to share, it doesn't come from spiritual pride. It's not about acting like you're part of some exclusive VIP club. Not at all. It stems purely from sheer, unadulterated excitement about this newfound freedom and a genuine, deep desire to see other people experience that exact same joy. But, as you might guess, the audience's reaction rarely matches your enthusiasm. When you actually try to share this with others, they just look at you with a potent mixture of confusion and, well, concern. They give you that polite little nod, they might even pat you on the back and say, "Well, that's wonderful for you." But internally, inside, they're definitely thinking, "You've gone a bit strange." Your enthusiastic sharing completely misses the mark. Instead of awaking them, you just end up looking a little bit crazy. You are bursting with the fundamental secrets of the universe, and they're just wondering if maybe you've had way too much caffeine today. Which brings us to Section 3, Ocean in a Teacup. We need to look at exactly why this massive failure in communication happens. The core issue isn't that you're trying to share some secret, mystical, hush-hush knowledge. It fails because it is literally like trying to pour the entire ocean into a tiny little teacup. It just does not work. The sheer volume and depth of the experience are simply way too vast for our ordinary channels of information exchange. In fact, attempting to force this massive ocean of awakening into the tiny teacup of everyday language doesn't just fail, it actually creates so much more confusion than clarity. You overflow the cup instantly, spilling meaning everywhere until there's nothing coherent left in the vessel itself. To put that into perspective, imagine trying to describe the intricate scent of a beautiful flower to someone who has never, ever experienced it. I mean, you can use all the adjectives you want, right? You can describe it all day long, breaking down the subtle notes of pollen and petals. But until that person actually leans in and smells the flower for themselves, they haven't really got it. Attempting to share a spiritual awakening is exactly like this. You are trying to verbally communicate a completely sensory, lived experience to someone who hasn't encountered the stimulus. The words are just a map. They are definitely not the territory itself. Let's dive a little deeper into this in Section 4. Words cannot capture water, a lived reality. So we need to completely redefine the problem here. Awakening is not an idea. Actually, scratch that. It's not any kind of intellectual concept at all. Therefore, it simply cannot be passed from one mind to another mind the way you might hand over a simple recipe for baking bread. You can't just list out the ingredients and expect the other person to experience the final, fresh-baked loaf. Awakening is a directly lived reality. It absolutely must be experienced firsthand to be understood. It operates on a wavelength entirely separate from intellect and reason, requiring total immersion rather than just passive listening. Think about the difference between merely reading a book about swimming versus actually jumping into the water. When you try to describe water to someone who has never been wet in their life, what are they actually receiving from you? Just words. Just empty sounds vibrating in the air. Now compare that to the undeniable physical reality of getting wet, feeling the actual way the water holds you up, the way it pushes and moves around your physical body. No matter how poetic you are, language can never ever capture the physical embrace of water. The entire vocabulary of buoyancy literally means nothing until your feet leave the pool floor. So, how does this actually look in practice? Section 5. The walk-in gardening paradox. Let's walk through this absolutely fascinating real-world anecdote from the source material that brilliantly grounds this whole philosophical breakdown. We're going to follow a man's profound psychological shift step by step. First, we have a man simply taking an evening walk in his garden. Nothing unusual at all. But then, he has that glimpse we talked about earlier. Suddenly, everything becomes completely transparent to him. Moving forward, he realizes in this massive flash of insight that he is not a separate being walking through a separate garden. The boundary between himself and his environment just entirely vanishes. And finally, his ego dissolves completely into the pure process of existence. There is no longer a walker and there is no garden. There is only walking gardening happening as one fluid, unified movement. He's literally become the verb rather than the noun. Naturally, as we learned earlier, he was incredibly excited by this monumental realization. I mean, wouldn't you be? The urge to share completely took over. He rushed inside, probably grabbed his wife by the shoulders, and frantically tried to explain that there is no walker and no garden. There is only walking gardening. Now you can just imagine this scene. He is vibrating with the energy of the universe, and she is likely standing there in the kitchen, giving him that exact mixture of confusion and concern we discussed. This incredibly lofty mystical realization comes crashing right back down to the mundane reality of everyday life, perfectly proving our thesis. Ordinary communication absolutely fails to handle extraordinary experience. I really want you to take this final thought to heart today. Certain things you simply cannot share because they cannot be communicated in the way ordinary information can. The next time you have a deeply profound realization or a moment of pure, unadulterated clarity, remember the teacup. Remember that language has its strict limits. This explainer shows us that some of the most powerful, life-altering truths simply aren't meant to be broadcasted or explained. Perhaps they're just meant to be lived. So, what powerful truths in your own life might you just need to keep to yourself, quietly enjoying the scent of the flower? Thank you so much for joining me in this deep dive. I encourage you to keep questioning, keep learning, and above all, keep experiencing the world directly.